Hello. Today in our conversation, I would like us to talk about something that I've thought about severally. I've had this conversation with, you know, many policy and political leaders. I've also had this conversation with a different fora. You know, Nigeria is structured in such a way that developing the country, you know, in a long-term uh, perspective may be very, very challenging. I'm not saying it's not possible, but it may be very challenging. Nigeria runs a kind of presidential democratic system that requires elections to be held every 4 years. In a country with very weak uh, democratic institutions, judicial institutions, and political institutions that are very weak, what you typically find out is that everybody, especially the executive, believe that once they win the first tenure, they are automatically entitled to a second tenure. It's usually an ego thing that you couldn't get a second tenure in office to complete 8 years. So everyone who wins a first tenure from day one begins to orchestrate the plan to get his second tenure secured. So, what does this entail in a country with very weak democratic institutions? Usually, every election in Nigeria, 98 or 99% of all elections in Nigeria are challenged through in the courts. So, except for the good thing the National Assembly did, to limit the time spent in courts adjudicating on these matters, we had a situation where if I take the case of former governor of Anambra and Gige, for example, he was in court for over 3 years, for his first term election. And so when a governor, for example, or a president wins election, remember these guys haven't had to sit in those offices before. So typically they have to learn the ropes, no matter how experienced or smart you think you are. Once you get into that office, you have to learn the office, about the job. Nigeria is a very, very diverse society with all kinds of challenges. So you have to learn the job. You have to, understand the dynamics that are involved. So, having said that, you will need to be able to understand the country, the system, and be able to mobilize the entire uh, governance structures and systems to understand your mission, your vision, and to align with your dreams and your, governance priorities. So when you have that kind of situation, what you find out is that this president or this governor will spend virtually the first 2 years of his administration putting things together. Within these same 2 years, he's also in court trying to secure his mandate. Do you understand? So, in trying to secure his mandate within 2 years, establishing governance priorities, mobilizing all the systems of governance, the public service, the legislature, the judiciary, every arm of government to be able to align with his priorities, vision, and long-term strategic development agenda. You find out that 2 years will not even be enough to set the foundation of his government. But in our own case, within these 2 years, even before the expiration of these 2 years, his guys in the field have already started beating the drum for his second term re-election. So usually third year is full political and electoral issues become the main focus of most of this executive. So he wins in his fourth year, you know, then begins to, again, litigations sometimes takes over a year, and start mobilizing new team, building new teams, vision, and all that. So you find out that for an 8-year tenure, the governor or the president will only spend effective 3 years, if up to that, even to govern the country or deliver dividends of democracy. So this is just, for me, it's pure hypocrisy. We know it's not working. We really know it's not working. So I've advocated a situation where we have a single tenure, a single longer tenure, 6 years, 7 years, even if it's 8 years, make it a single tenure so that the governor or the president gets elected. He knows he's not under any pressure for a second tenure. So he will implement priorities, legacy priorities with long term perspective, knowing that he's not going to pander to any interest just to secure a second tenure. We've seen situations where decisions of presidents and governors are watered down, because to assess several interests, to avoid, the political backlash that comes with the second tenure election processes. So many presidents, so many governors, make a lot of mistakes. Even in appointments, they put people in their cabinets who do not, need to be in those cabinets just because they feel that they need them to stabilize for their second tenure election. I think this is one of the reasons why former President Obasanjo actually wanted a fourth term, because by the by the time his second tenure was expiring, he realized that he hadn't actually achieved his long-term dream or desire of setting Nigeria on a very solid development foundation. And if you backstep into history, I've tried to study countries, very developed Western countries. I've noticed that, yes, they introduced democracy to us. They introduced a system of government that requires us to elect our leaders. But I've come to understand that somehow they have been able to, develop some kind of homegrown structures and systems that allows them to keep a leader in office for a longer time. Because when a leader stays in office for a long time, it gives that leader an understanding, the idea to sell his vision, build his team, mobilize the whole country around that vision and priorities, and have the time to really set up the foundation for those visions and dreams and priorities to be mainstream in the entire system. That's how you build a system. And I, in also looking at histories of Western societies, I've come to realize you can argue with me, you can bring better facts if you think that I'm not correct. Like I said, this is just a conversation, something I think can help the country move forward. I also think that many of them set the foundations of the quality of development that we see in these countries under a leadership that had a longer tenure in office. You will see places like Russia. Putin has been in and out of that office, president and prime minister, for almost 20 years. We saw Merkel of Germany. We saw Margaret Thatcher in England. We see many leaders in the West staying so long in office. Yeah. Yeah, you may argue that yes, in Africa too, many people have stayed long in office. Some people have stayed in fact, Africa have the longest serving leaders, yet without any commensurable, measurable development. Yes, yeah, because we have weak systems. We have psychology about leadership and politics quite different. But I think that for a country like Nigeria, which that I know it's very difficult for any leader to extend his tenure in a very diverse and enlightened country like Nigeria. We may need to look again at the system of government we are running to give leaders a long-term opportunity, a longer-term opportunity, or a structure that doesn't, put them under the pressure of seeking re-election. The idea is that after 4 years, you go back to renew your mandate. And if the people are satisfied, they will give you back the vote. But we know that it hasn't been our case. We have very weak electoral systems. We have very weak citizenry that lack the proper capacity to make quality electoral choices. We know all that. We know how elections are monetized, how all our fault lines become very visible during election: ethnicity, religion, affiliations, and sentiments. We know all that. That's the facts. So rather than pretend that we are doing something called democracy that requires us to go back every 4 years, and the kind of resources, time, money, human resources, killings, violence, and all kinds of bad blood injected into the system, all in the effort to seek a second tenure. Most times you find out that the second tenure is fought with so much tenacity and ferociously, more than even the first term. And when you finish the second term, you're also going back to do your transition, trying to hand over to a godson, and that's another. So most times these chief executives get into office and the only thing they do is just preparing for the next election and not for the next generation. If you think this is a good idea, we can push it forward. We can advocate around it. If you have better ideas, please share after watching this video. Thank you for listening.